Hello, dear students. My name is Gulnara Babjanova. Welcome to my English class. Our topic today is types of pronouns, relative pronouns. Before you start, you see some learning objectives. And as a result of this lesson, you will understand the role and usage of relative pronouns. And you will learn how to locate relative pronouns in a sentence. So what are pronouns? Pronouns are the words that replace nouns in a sentence to avoid repetition of nouns in a sentence. For example, Rita is a good girl. Rita is very intelligent. Rita is a good girl, and instead of Rita the second time, we use pronoun. She is a very intelligent. And there are several types of pronouns. You see, personal, demonstrative, possessive, reflexive, interrogative, indefinite, and relative. And what about relative pronouns? Relative pronouns are used after a noun to make it clear which person or thing we are talking about. The information that follows the pronouns is contained in what we call a relative clause. There is often some confusion about which word to use in different situations. For example, the man who lent me the book was the book which I borrowed, or the library where we met. Which relative pronoun must we use? First, for people, who, that, whose, whom. For example, the man who or that lent me the book, or the man whose book I borrowed. The relative pronoun whom is common in formal styles. For example, the man from whom I borrowed the book, it's in very formal speech. It becomes less formal if you put the preposition at the end. For example, the man whom I borrowed the book from, it is used in formal speech. In modern and spoken English, it is best to use who instead and put the preposition at the end. For example, the man who I borrowed the book from, in formal speech. Which relative pronoun must we use? For objects, which, that, or whose. For example, the book which or that I borrowed, or the book which that is entitled Peace. Note, you can also say the book, the title of which is Peace, or the book of which the title is Peace. In this case, the noun is always preceded by the definite article the. Which, next, we must use relative pronoun for places, times, and reason. Where, when, why, that. In informal English, you can use these as relative pronouns. In formal English, use which with a preposition. For example, the library where we met in informal speech. In formal speech, the library at which we met. In informal speech, the day which or that we met. In formal speech, the day on which we met. In informal speech, the reason why was that I was at the library, or in formal speech, the reason of which I was at the library. So, can we drop the relative pronoun? In formal written English, it is best not to drop it. In informal and spoken English, it is common to drop it, but it is not always possible. You can drop who, whom, that, and which if the information is related to the object of the sentence, but not when it is related to the subject. For example, the man who or that lent me the book, or the book which or that is called Peace. But we can drop in these sentences. The man I borrowed the book from, or the book borrowed. Note, you cannot drop whom when it is next to the preposition. For example, the man from whom I borrowed the book. So you can not drop whose or which or where. For example, the man whose book I borrowed, or the book, the title of which is Peace, or the library where I met him. You can drop when and why in the same way. You can drop that. For example, the day I met him, the day I met him. Or the reason why that I was at the library, the reason I was at the library. So what and how are not relative pronouns because they cannot come after a noun. They replace a noun and a relative pronoun. What? The same what, which. What I read in the book surprised me. How? The manner in which. I still remember how we met. What is non-defining relative clause? A non-defining relative clause gives us additional information about the person or thing. If we eliminate this information from the sentence, the listener still knows who or what we are talking about. In written English, there is always a comma before a non-defining relative clause. For example, the man who lent me the book was the author himself, who you may have heard of. Or the man who lent me the book was the author himself. The book which I borrowed, which you may have read, is entitled Peace. The book which I borrowed is entitled Peace. The library where we met, where I always borrow books, is the largest city. Or the library where we met is the largest in the city. Note, you cannot use that instead of who or which in non-defining clauses. The man who or that lent me the book was the author himself, or who you may have heard of. The book which that or that I borrowed, or which you may have read, is entitled Peace. Note, sometimes which gives additional information about the whole sentence instead of just the noun in the sentence. The man who or that lent me the book was the author himself, which was totally amazing. And I'll give you some exercises. You have to complete the following sentences with an appropriate word. If the word can be dropped, put in brackets. So, thank you for your listening. Goodbye. See you next time.